There is a number that occasionally gets cited in entertainment industry circles that genuinely stops people when they hear it for the first time. 19.8 million views in 28 days. That is the viewership figure Netflix recorded for a show called The Abandons in December 2025. 19.8 million households watched it within the first 4 weeks of release. It spent 2 consecutive weeks inside Netflix's top 10 English-language series globally. If those numbers were applied to almost any other entertainment platform on Earth, the show would have been renewed before its first season had even finished airing. But here's the strange part. Netflix canceled The Abandons in January 2026. 28 days after those 19.8 million views were recorded, the show was dead. No second season, no explanation. The cast found out the same way the audience did, and The Abandons was not an isolated case. In 2026 alone, Netflix has already canceled 9 shows. 9. Before the year was even half over, and several of them had numbers that, by every traditional measure of success in the entertainment industry, should have guaranteed their survival. The Vince Staples Show earned 94% from critics and 88% from audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. Canceled after 2 seasons, Alice in Borderland pulled 25 million views in its 3rd season alone. 25 million. And Netflix confirmed in its own viewership report that the 3rd season was the final one. Terminator Zero had 2 additional seasons planned, fully developed, ready to produce. Canceled after 1. In 2025, Netflix canceled at least 30 shows. In 2024, it canceled more original programming than any other major network or streaming platform on Earth. And the reason for every single one of these cancellations is not what most people assume. Because Netflix is not canceling shows because they are bad. It is canceling them because of a number, a very specific number, measured in a very specific window. And once that window closes, almost nothing can save a show that missed the target, regardless of how many people loved it. To understand why Netflix cancels the way it does, it is necessary to understand what Netflix actually is and what it is not. Netflix launched its streaming service in 2007. By 2013, when it released House of Cards as its first major original production, it was operating on a model that no traditional television network had ever used. It had no advertisers to satisfy, no weekly ratings to report, no network executives demanding overnight numbers, and crucially, it had access to something no broadcaster had ever possessed before: complete real-time data on exactly how every subscriber watched every piece of content, not estimates, not Nielsen panels, not sample groups, exact data, down to the minute, down to the second. Netflix knew not just how many people started a show, it knew how many finished each episode, how many paused, how many rewound, how many abandoned a show entirely at the 14-minute mark of the 2nd episode and never returned. By 2015, Netflix was processing viewing data from over 65 million subscribers in real time. It knew with a precision no television executive in history had ever had access to exactly which content was worth continuing and which was not. But here's the strange part. Rather than use that data to nurture shows, to give them time to find their audience, the way the greatest television series in history always required, Netflix used it to build something else entirely: a cancellation algorithm. The mechanism at the center of Netflix's content strategy is known internally as the 28-day viewership window. When a show is released on Netflix, the platform measures one primary metric in the first 28 days: the number of unique households that watch at least 70% of at least one episode. That figure, households completing an episode within 28 days, is the single most weighted data point in Netflix's renewal decision process. What happens after day 28 carries almost no weight in the calculation. The Abandons recorded 19.8 million views in those 28 days. But according to viewership data cited by Deadline, only 4.8 million additional views were recorded in the weeks that followed. That drop-off from 19.8 million to near zero velocity in week 5 told Netflix's algorithm everything it needed to know. The audience that was going to watch the show had already watched it. There was no growth trajectory, no word-of-mouth engine still running. The show had peaked on arrival and declined immediately after. By Netflix's internal model, that pattern does not justify the cost of a second season. But here's the strange part. That cost calculation is the part of this story most people never see. Because Netflix does not simply cancel shows that underperform. It cancels shows whose second season would cost more to produce than the incremental subscribers that second season is projected to attract. And that number, the projected incremental subscriber value of a renewed show, is almost never made public. The creator of The Abandons, Kurt Sutter, who built Sons of Anarchy into one of the most watched cable dramas in history, posted publicly after the cancellation that Netflix had chosen, in his exact words, algorithm over creator's vision. Within hours, Netflix's legal team had been in contact. The post was deleted. Netflix's algorithm-driven approach means even shows with dedicated audiences face termination. Streaming metrics trump traditional success indicators like critical praise or fan engagement. That statement is not an opinion. It is a documented operating principle. The Vince Staples Show is the clearest evidence. The series earned 94% critical approval and 88% audience approval, numbers that, in the history of television, would have made it untouchable. In the traditional network model, a show with those approval ratings would have run for a decade. But Netflix's own viewership transparency report, released in the second half of 2025, ranked The Vince Staples Show at position number 1,446. Position 1,446 out of every piece of content on the platform. A show that critics called one of the best comedies of its generation was being watched by fewer households than 1,445 other titles on Netflix, including content that had been on the platform for years, content that cost a fraction of what The Vince Staples Show cost to produce, and content that nobody in the entertainment press had written a single word about. The approval rating meant nothing. The completion metric was the only number that mattered, and completion metrics are not a measure of quality. They are a measure of algorithmic discoverability, a show that Netflix's recommendation engine does not actively surface to the right audience will not accumulate completions, regardless of how good it is. And a show that does not accumulate completions in 28 days will not be renewed, regardless of what the reviews say. The part of this story most people don't know is what this means for the shows currently on the platform right now. By the time a Netflix cancellation is announced publicly, the decision has almost always been made weeks earlier. The 28-day window closes quietly. The renewal threshold is either met or it is not. And the announcement, when it comes, is typically released on a Friday afternoon, with minimal press attached to a brief statement about the platform's commitment to its content slate. The pattern has become so predictable that entertainment journalists now track Netflix releases on a countdown. Shows that do not appear in the weekly top 10 by day 7 of release are already being discussed as cancellation candidates. Shows that disappear from the top 10 by day 14 are considered likely casualties. 9 shows canceled in 2026 before May, 30 in 2025, 16 in 2024. The volume is not declining, it is accelerating, and the creators who survive inside this system are not necessarily the ones making the best television. They are the ones who have learned to make television that the algorithm surfaces familiar concepts, known IP sequels, reboots, adaptations of things people already searched for, content engineered not for the second season, but for the first 28 days. One creator accused Netflix of using algorithms to control its programming instead of valuing sustained storytelling. He was not wrong, and he was not the first. The question the entertainment industry has been circling for 3 years without a definitive answer is whether Netflix's cancellation model is destroying the conditions under which great television is made. The evidence is not ambiguous. Breaking Bad's first season was watched by 1.2 million people. By traditional network metrics, it would have been canceled before Walter White cooked his second batch. It survived because AMC gave it time. It went on to become one of the most watched series in streaming history, largely on Netflix. The Wire's first season ratings were so low that HBO's internal data showed it was being watched primarily by critics and industry insiders. It ran for 5 seasons. It is now studied in universities. Seinfeld's pilot was described by NBC's testing audience as having no redeeming characters and scoring below the network's renewal threshold. It ran for 9 seasons and 180 episodes. None of those shows would survive Netflix's 28-day window. None of them would have reached the completion thresholds Netflix requires in the first month. All of them became culturally defining works of television that generated revenue for decades. But here's the strange part. Netflix is not making a mistake. It is making a rational business decision. The platform has nearly 200 million monthly subscribers. Its primary competitive challenge in 2026 is not producing the greatest television ever made. It is retaining subscribers who will cancel their plan the moment they run out of content they want to watch. Content that keeps people subscribed for 1 more month is worth more to Netflix's model than content that becomes culturally important 5 years from now. The 28-day window does not measure quality. It measures immediate subscriber retention value. And for a platform running on monthly subscription fees, that is the only number that has ever mattered. The shows that get canceled were not failures. They were casualties of a system that was never designed to measure what they were. 19.8 million people watched The Abandons. 25 million watched the final season of Alice in Borderland. The Vince Staples Show was called one of the finest comedies of its generation by the people whose job it is to know. None of it was enough, because the most powerful entertainment platform in history is not in the business of making great television. It is in the business of keeping 200 million people subscribed for 1 more month. And those two things, it turns out, are not always the same business.